Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I'll be speaking with Andrew Mackinnon, who is Senior Vice President and Executive General Manager at Medable. And that conversation will be about leveraging AI to transform clinical development and accelerate life-saving therapies to patients. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So, Andrew, you've presented at industry events such as Scope US and Scope EU, the DIA's annual meeting, Health, CNS, and Google Health. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about your journey to doing what you do today at Medable.
Thank you, and thanks for reminding me of my rather hectic travel schedule over the last 12 months. It's been fun getting out and talking to so many people. My journey to get to where I am now, I started. I think I'm now able to say I've been in the industry for just over 25 years now. So I've just ticked over that 2.5 decades. I started off my career in the pharmaceutical industry. So I graduated with a degree in neuroscience and moved into pharmaceuticals. I've worked at a range of different pharma companies. I spent a little time at Roche Genentech, a couple of other kind of mid-size pharma companies, small biotech. The largest part of my career I spent at Covance. I was at Covance for about 10 years, where I worked as a senior director for trial delivery within the general medicine therapy area unit that we had there. And most of my career has been that kind of approach. So clinical development, portfolio oversight, study delivery, study management, that kind of activity. So the jump across into Medable and working for effectively what is a Silicon Valley startup company in the technology arena was a very kind of different juncture for my career, certainly something very new to get into. It's been fascinating. It's been one of the most enjoyable 6 years that I've had in my career. But really what I was looking for, having worked in the industry for such a long time, having delivered a lot of studies, a lot of portfolios, seen drugs taken to market, gone through the entire life cycle, really was looking at what can I do to see how we can do this better, a little different, something that we can do to accelerate. It was my boss at Covance that gave me a ring. She had just joined Medable. She gave me a ring and said that she had just joined this company. There was some fascinating stuff that was going on. We were looking at doing things a little differently within clinical trials, and did I fancy a change and driving that kind of different approach. And that led me to Medable. And then, as I say, I've been here for 6 years and very much focused on providing that kind of SME input into what Medable does, ensuring that the technology we develop and how it's implemented is very much aligned with that requirement of clinical research companies and portfolio development.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Andrew. So let's dive into this fascinating field, as you say, and focus on doing it better and a little bit differently. So I was wondering if you could provide listeners with an overview and describe the landscape of possibilities when it comes to AI's role in clinical trials and real-world evidence.
I think it's probably fair to say that the landscape of possibilities for AI in clinical research is pretty much unlimited. Really, any aspect of clinical research, aside from kind of that doctor patient interface that's at the very core of what we do, a lot of the different areas, tasks, processes, workflows that go on clinical research are right from being supported or to a degree automated through the use of AI and particularly agentic AI. So I think that there is an awful lot that can be done in that area. I mentioned Medable being a technology company. That kind of approach that Medable has taken is to be quite provocative in terms of what we want to do. We have a mantra, a vision. In Silicon Valley is often referred to as a big, hairy, audacious goal, and that is to drive towards how we can deliver a study in a day. We can roll a study in a day and complete a study in a year. Now, that as a mantra is pretty scary to someone that spent a long time in clinical research. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but what it's designed to do is to say what we're doing at the moment, just kind of spinning that wheel a little bit quicker, is not going to get us to where we need to go to. We're seeing huge amounts of development work being done on the discovery side of things, lab bench research, putting assets into the top of that clinical trial funnel. And if we take that funnel and just try and spin it quicker, we're not going to get where we need to. It's too much of a human focused operation, and that comes with very inherent scale challenges that are nigh on impossible to overcome just by adding more bodies to the mix or throwing more money or resource at something. So that's really the purpose of that goal that Medable has, that one vision that we have, is to envision a different way of doing things. And it's been throughout my career at Medable, Michelle, our CEO, has challenged us constantly on that. I mean, it's a constant source of, how do we do this differently? What are we doing? I just don't just take the same thing and try and trim 5% off or save a week here or a week there. Do it completely differently. It's been very difficult to see how that could be done. We've made some really significant progress there. We've done a lot, particularly around study startup and study launch. But the agentic side of things, particularly with the real burgeoning growth of LLMs and the agentic capabilities that AI is starting to pick up, is the first time really that we've seen a path to genuinely doing exactly what we've set out to do and drive that medicine to market quicker, and kind of 10x the amount of medicine being bought, new molecules being brought to patients on a yearly basis. So it's a very exciting time to be part of this kind of approach, and we're seeing that same kind of excitement with a lot of the customers that we talk to. Some really significant goals: 50, 60, 70% reduction of workflows, processes, time, turnaround times, cycle times, those kind of things being pushed, and starting to see meaningful progress towards those goals.
Thank you, Andrew. A big, hairy, audacious goal indeed, as you've been describing it. My word. But as you say, there's a lot of excitement around there, and I'm quite impressed by this up to 70% of workflow processes reduced. So I want to talk now about something called white space. What is white space, Andrew?
So it's a concept that came out of a report. It's a yearly report produced by IQVIA that they put out there, and it essentially measures the periods of time spent for a particular asset. It goes through its life cycle, the amount of time it spends within trials and the amount of time it spends between trials. So obviously within trials, you're looking at the amount of time spent doing phase 1, 2, 3, and then you move into submission and approval. And then between each of those stages, between each of those phases of development, is a period of white space. Now, it's not downtime. There's a lot going on in that activity, but it's not periods of time when patients are being dosed, data is being collected. It's periods of time where decisions are being made, data is being reviewed and analyzed, conversations with regulators are going on. What does my phase 3 need to look like? Will you accept my primary endpoint? All of those kind of things are taking place in that period of time. And that period of time, that white space, is something which has been incredibly obstinate over a very long period of time. It's not something that shrunk. It's actually something that's growing. So the last report showed that the white space had increased by, I think it was about 14 months on average across all indications. Actual time spent within clinical trials had reduced by about 7 months, which is great. So it shows a lot of what we're doing is having an effect. But actually the white space between those trials had increased, negating any of the benefits that we brought by shrinking actual cycle times and clinical trial cycle times down. A number of different ways you could look at that, a number of different potential causes. One of them that I was talking to a lot of folk about at a lot of those conferences you mentioned early. Sometimes when we try and run really, really fast in the clinical trial, we try and get it set up really fast, launch into it really fast, conduct it fast. A lot of those processes catch us up at the end, and we end up spending more time in data analysis at the end because we've collected data in a way that wasn't really, it wasn't planned, it wasn't thought out. We're just going to find ourselves at the end with disparate data sets. We have to pull them together and analyze them. That's potentially one of those causes of increased cycle time. There's also a lot of resource implications to what's going on at that point in time. There's a lot of very heavy analytical processes going on, deciding whether I move from phase 1 to 2, from phase 2 to 3. Is that worth the investment? There's a lot of processes that go on at that point in time. And it's a lot of time that can be supported and potentially reduced with the use of AI, which is what we're now starting to see. As well as there's another kind of period of white space, or periods of white space, that we see in clinical research too, and that's actually within each clinical trial. So whilst the trial is ongoing, there's also a lot of white space that happens in there. Every time a protocol amendment happens, as you move through different processes, you finalize a protocol and then you have to run through feasibility, select your sites. There's a lot of downtime in all of those processes. And I think that's probably more so than the gaps between trials. That's the kind of white space that we can really focus the agentic piece on in the short term. there was a fascinating comparison when you look through different indications and therapeutic areas. The only area that had any shortening of white space over the period of time the report was considered was in vaccines. Now, obviously, there's a very clear route as to why that happened. That was the COVID vaccine development. And there was a huge amount that was done there, running trials in parallel, doing an awful lot of things at risk. Anybody that was involved in that was damn near broken by the end of it. It was put a huge amount of pressure on. But what it did show is that there is capacity in the system. There are ways of doing things more efficiently. There are ways of doubling up and doing things together, running real-time data reviews with regulators. But it can't be something that is done purely with human resource application. And I think that's a really exciting application that we can look at for agentic approaches. How can we take a lot of that routine, mundane, kind of task that done, it's incredibly time consuming. How can we take a lot of that, have that done by a lot of the AI within the system, a lot of the AI tools, and how can we take the humans away and do the more kind of the value add, the very the very difficult, complex decision making, have that human focused activity done, but supported by a lot of the AI piece. And I think that's where companies are starting to see pathways to the kind of percentage reductions that we spoke about by taking that kind of approach. But it was very interesting to see that we had a great example recently of where there is capacity to do things like that. We know it can be done. We just have to find a way to do it without humans. We've spoken a lot about kind of we're at the limit of human only clinical development. We need an extra tool and an extra element to help us. And at Medable, we firmly believe that AI agentic approach is the tool that can help us move towards that.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew. Let's unpack some of certainly the latter part of what you were just saying there. So, if we focus now on helping integrate generative and, especially as you've been mentioning, agentic AI with not necessarily human-less operations, but human in the loop oversight, while prioritizing, as you say, patient safety and regulatory compliance, that is like GXP and 21 CFR Part 11. Let's answer that hypothetical question you were asking a moment ago. How do you ensure the scientific and ethical demands of clinical research, delivering usable, compliant, keyword there, tools that enhance trial outcomes and patient care?
Well, if we take, I think it's highlighted really nicely by the CRA agent that we've recently developed, and that's one that we have moved into to live use now with a number of customers. If you look at kind of the classic challenges that CRAs live through on a daily basis, and this is probably applicable, it's why I like this as an example. It's applicable to a lot of the other personas that we see within clinical research. So I think when I talk through CRAs, you can probably imagine how this would also be applicable to data management, to people within safety, to medics, to project managers, a lot of different groups. CRAs themselves spend a huge amount of time looking across multiple different systems, 13, 15, 17 different clinical systems, from the EDC, the IRT, the CTMS, labs, imaging, eco data, all kinds of different databases that they're having to work across. And what they're having to do is to stitch together a picture of what's happening at the sites they're looking after the study that they're involved in. What is it that the data is telling me? What story am I trying to get out of that data? And by logging into all those different systems, trying to piece that together and understand what is the next best thing for me to do. Now, that's a hugely time consuming process to go through. At the end of it, you end up with an action, and the CRA is then able to take take that action and implement it. And typically that would be a very kind of human orientated action supporting other humans in the system. The CRAs are instrumental in supporting sites in delivering clinical studies. So they would be taking that next best action to help the site refine their processes, fill in a piece of missing information. But it's taken the CRA a huge amount of time to get to that point. And so what the agent is looking to do is to manage all of that kind of cross-system data aggregation and analysis, presenting the human in that system back with, well, I've reviewed all those data points, I've reviewed the current situation, and these are the three things that I think you need to go and do based upon protocol, the monitoring plan, all the other knowledge that the agent's been given about the study in question. The CRA is then able to go and do that action as the human in that loop. So that's kind of how we see that, that kind of human supported approach. It's difficult to see many of the workflows where you can completely eliminate humans from the process entirely, but what we can certainly do is eliminate that kind of dull, drudgery, mundane data aggregation tasks and trying to work out what's going on and present them with the actions they need to take. And they're then the best placed people to go and have that action, to go and talk to the sites, understand what the problems are and resolve them, having had the agent identify where they need to apply their time.
Thank you for that, Andrew. So, how does all this that we've been discussing today advance health equity for underserved communities?
That's a really interesting question. It's one that's come up a couple of times from conversations that I've had. And I think the applications of AI kind of more broadly in health equity are fascinating. There's all kinds, and we could probably fill entire podcasts or entire days with conversations around the implications of AI within health equity. We talk about all of the underlying data that models are trained on and where it comes from and bias and all those kind of things. I think there's a lot that we can look at from a health equity perspective. There's a lot of, I think, fundamentally, if we just take the view of what Medable's overall goal is, which is enabling, medicines to come to market quicker, a lot of those underserved populations, a lot of those significantly impacted by that, and just presenting more medications to market quicker, enabling patients to have access to those is a very key part of solving some of the health equity disparities. The other part as well is clinical trials are very often a source of access into healthcare for a number of underrepresented populations. And so by enabling more trials to be run, by enabling more trials to be run more efficiently, less burdensome, by enabling the participation in clinical research, whether you look at it from a site perspective or you look at it from a patient perspective, by enabling that to be much less burdensome, those are ways in which access into clinical research are going to be made far easier and far more equitable. If we look at the different types of underrepresented populations that we see in clinical research, whether that be from kind of a racial or from an ethnicity perspective or from a gender perspective, we see significant underrepresentation of women within clinical research. And by enabling less burdensome participation, we open up that as a potential source of healthcare access for a lot of that as well. So I think there are some very significant applications of AI that will look at equity, health equity, and it's a really important part of when we're running clinical studies, looking at participation from underrepresented populations and ensuring that they are able to participate, and the data that we collect is more representative of the patient populations that we see. That can only be a good thing. It can only advance the scientific understanding of what we've got, and it can only enable greater levels of trust into the situation. I mentioned COVID earlier. That was one of the areas that was brought up quite consistently across some of the COVID research, that it didn't represent a lot of the populations impacted by the virus. And I think that's kind of indicative of some of the challenges that we've seen over the years with clinical research and in ensuring we broaden participation.
Absolutely. So, a good thing indeed, setting aside the biases. So, just to be clear for listeners, earlier you were talking about Medable's CRA tool, Andrew, but I believe Medable has also just launched its second clinical trial agent, TMF agent, which automates
Yes.
one of the biggest labour-intensive processes of clinical research, that is to say, trial master file process. So can you tell us
Yep.
more about that?
Yes, so that's a fantastic use case for agents. It's kind of one of those prime use cases that agents were made for. And when we've spoken to a number of customers, some of the large pharma companies out there, they're filing upwards of 1 million documents a year into trial master files across the studies that they're working on. At the moment, each of those documents that's filed in there requires an element of human touch. Someone has to find it. Someone has to put it into the queue for it to be filed. Someone has to sit down and work out what is the document. I have to code it according to the TMF structure. I then need to go and put it into the right place in the TMF. And then at some point in the future, someone's going to have to go and do an audit of that and make sure that all of those things happened and that everything was done so that the TMF is inspection ready and of high quality. Now, agents are able to do just about every step of that process, and are able to do it incredibly efficiently. So we can have, again, depending on the kind of processes and workflows that companies have, you could have an agent that sits monitoring an email inbox. That could be someone's their work email. It could be a TMF kind of specific generic email. As documents come in, it picks them up, it reads them, it uses its model understanding to understand what that document is. Is it an ethics approval letter? Is it a particularly important email justifying a decision that was made? Is it a protocol? Is it a consent document? All kinds of documents that would go into a TMF. It's able to know what it is, what study it's for, what site it's for, and then it can go and put it into the TMF. So the goal, or the underlying objective of that TMF agent, is really to get a document from its kind of creation, its inception, all the way into a TMF without having a human touching it at any point in time. And at the end, what you have is essentially a constantly inspection ready TMF with an incredibly low amount of human resources required to build and maintain it. So that's kind of the summary of the TMF agent. But as you mentioned, it is one of the very, very high administrative burdensome tasks that we have. As I say, pharma companies out there filing over 1 million of documents on a yearly basis.
Quite something indeed. Right, we've been talking a lot about AI today. So with everything we've been discussing about the technological developments within the clinical trial space, I was wondering if you could perhaps glance at your crystal ball and provide listeners with a forward glance to what might be coming with everything moving so fast within the next, say, 5 years.
It's interesting because as I think back to the conversation I've had in the past about different technologies, we kind of get this horizon of tell me what this looks like in 5 years' time, and that always seems like a relatively short horizon in normal clinical research. I was doing a presentation with Google as one of their life sciences summer camps, and I was asked what's changed in the last 12 to 24 months that's enabled you to build this agent studio platform and deliver agents into trials. And my response was, well, it's the wrong question. It's really what's changed in the last 12 to 24 minutes. So a 5-year horizon from an AI perspective seems like a lifetime at this point in time. Everything's changing so rapidly. So I think what we will see if we gaze into the crystal ball and look off into the future, and I think we'll say 5 years because we know the pharmaceutical industry moves relatively slowly, but I think the potential for this to be a much shorter kind of 1, 2, 3 year time frame. We're already seeing the impacts of AI on drug discovery. We've seen huge amounts of money invested in computational biology and kind of AI-driven discovery processes to identify asset candidates for entry into clinical trials. What I think we'll see in very short order is a kind of a reimagining or a re-engineering of the clinical trial process. Essentially, what we're dealing with is a funnel issue. The funnel is too difficult to move things through. It's too human resource burden. So I think what we'll move towards is more of kind of like a smart pipeline of clinical trials that can take the huge amount of additional assets that are going to be fed into the top of that and speed those molecules through that clinical trial process. Obviously, we still have all of the scientific rigor to develop that with. We still have all of the ethical and regulatory compliance that we have to take and all of that rigor that is absolutely necessary in drug discovery. But I think if we're able to use those agents to automate a lot of those manual tasks, we should start to see that average drug development timeline of 10 to 12 years shrinking significantly. And we'll start to see what I think is a really good metric for us to look at is the number of new drugs approved on an annual basis. That number has been pretty stubborn. I think it's hovering around 15 new drugs a year are approved by the FDA for entry into the market. I think that is something we could use as a benchmark. And I would like to see that in the next 3 to 5 years, well, actually we need to go a little bit further than that, but I would like to see that number increasing significantly. 50 a year is just too few. We need to look at that needs to be doubled, tripled, 4x, 5x. It needs to increase significantly. And I think that is the thing that we'll see as an output of all of the work we're doing around AI.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I'm very pleased that I altered my question before this conversation down from a decade. There you have it, listeners. Acceleration indeed. Thank you very much for your time today, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you very much.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.